Internet baby.
There are 21 to 46 million slaves living right now. What are the most terrifying facts you know? Do any of you all happen to know about sleep paralysis? It is defined as the temporary inability to move or speak, and only occurs when someone is waking up or falling asleep. Do you know what's scarier than that? The fact that it's extremely common. There are around 3 million cases of this in America per year. Since the population here is around 300 million, about 1% of the population gets it every year. Combining that with the fact that the average lifespan is about 75 years, let's just say that you are very likely to have this happen to you, if it hasn't already. But why does it paralyze you? You might ask. Well, since your dreams always involve you moving around, walking, running, speaking, your brain shuts down communication to your muscles, causing you not to be able to move. During sleep paralysis, you feel as if you can't speak, and then feel a shortage of breath, almost like if you stop breathing. You feel an object, or a large pressure on you, which is why many people describe the sensation like a monster sitting on their chests. It usually lasts for about 80 or so seconds, during the switch between consciousness and REM sleep, or the other way around. If you've already gotten it, you probably know how scary it is. And if you haven't, it's probably just a matter of time. This is the candeeiro fish, a species that lives in Brazil. And what he does for a living? Well, the usual fish stuff. Swimming, being slimy, entering the urethra of random men to suck the blood from their penises. What? Yes, you read it right. This fish is one of the most feared parasites on Earth. You will never see it coming. You are in Brazil, taking a bath in a lake, and a week later you will find yourself unable to piss, with excruciating pains in your genital area. The good news? You have to be stupid to take a bath in a lake in the Amazonian jungle. The bad news? If you find this thing in your penis, you will have to undergo a surgery to remove the bastard, and, while you wait for it, you will have your blood sucked from an area of your body that you'd rather keep safe from vampires' penis-entering fishes. Sweet dreams. The human skull is weaker than a coconut. This makes me terrified of coconut crabs. You know those annoying security screening checkpoints you have to go through before boarding a plane? They're actually pointless, and no, I'm not just saying that because of how annoying they are. They literally don't work. In 2017, the US government conducted an experiment to try to determine how effective TSA screenings actually are at detecting dangerous materials like weapons. They simulated the screening process and sent bags with test items, i.e. weapons, through the traditional procedure used to process passengers. The result? 95% of the items were not detected. This means that, every day, thousands of people go through an unnecessarily complex process that doesn't do anything to protect people, and could lead to an untold number of weapons slipping through security. There's a fucked up worm, called a bobbit worm, that lives burrowed into coral in the ocean, where it waits and ambushes fish, and crabs and such with razor-sharp pincers, that often immediately cut its prey in half. But it gets worse from there. Their jaws are so powerful they can chew up rock-solid coral and cut burrows into it. Their pincers have enough strength to shear through even thick bones. Did I mention, yet that they grow up to 3 meters long, 9 to 10 feet? Yeah, because they do that. They also have venomous spines that cause permanent numbness, after excruciating pain, if you were to grab one. They're notorious for laying their near-microscopic eggs inside coral that is sold to saltwater fish tank enthusiasts who start to notice various creatures in their tank disappearing, or being cut into pieces. They can survive damn near anything, and are borderline impossible to kill without taking the entire coral out, and burning it or something. And the best part, they're polycheat, so if you cut one in half, the head and tail grow into 2 new worms like a fucking hydra, and they can mate with each other and reproduce. Jeffrey Dahmer drilled a hole into some victims' skulls and tried pouring different toxic liquids into the hole. He was trying to make a sex slave that could eat and drink, but could in no way fight back or escape. The worst fact is that victims might survive the first hole with all brain function intact, and live long enough to be fully aware they were going to get a second or third hole drilled. One of the victims managed to escape, the police were called, and somehow the police turned the 14-year-old victim back over to Dahmer. Before, he convinced them that an underage teen was old enough to be his gay lover, and that they were just having a lover's quarrel. Squids have donut-shaped brains, with their fruit pipe going through the middle, meaning if a squid eats something too large or angular, it can damage its own brain. A frog vomits by spitting out its stomach and digging the food out with its arms. This would make a pretty cool party trick. Unless it's a party full of other frogs. Most schizophrenics kill themselves during a lucid period. I lean that fact, but I regret the day I understood it. I'm a psychiatrist, MD, and, during medical school, I had the privilege of working at NGBRI building as part of my psych rotation. My very last day, I stayed late to check up on a man with schizophrenia who was generally pretty disorganized. When I was questioning him, he seemed more lucid, and he mentioned something about studying literature. Having recently been half an English major in college, I engaged him, and he started rhapsodizing about Faulkner Tennessee Williams, really insightful comments. Then he moved on to music, jazz especially. I spent an hour after my shift with that man, just listening. I passed in attending when I went to write my notes, told him what had happened, on joy in my voice. He informed me that the man was a former professor, had 2 PhDs. He said that many people with severe mental illness are living in 1-2 rooms of a mansion, and once in a while, the lights come on in the rest of the house, and you can see what it once was. And so can they. Cancer often takes years or decades to become a problem. We all have dozens of tiny pinhead-sized clusters of cancer cells in our bodies. But most of the time conditions for them to grow out of control are somewhat rare. Usually when someone is diagnosed with cancer, the original cluster of cancer cells have been growing inside of the person's body for many years. This is Oscar, the cute, snuggly, lovable therapy cat. Therapy cat, you may ask. I know, I was surprised when I saw it too. In case you don't know already, a therapy cat is basically a cat that helps humans deal with emotional problems. Don't all cats do that? Well, Oscar the therapy cat was raised in the dementia unit of the Steerhouse Nursing and Rehabilitation Center in Providence, Rhode Island. In 2007, he was featured in an article by David Dose called the New England Journal of Medicine. This is where things start getting creepy. According to David Dose, Oscar is able to predict the impending death of terminally ill patients. How does he do this? By lying down with them a few hours before they die. Funny enough, there are many real stories concerning him. But here's a summary. After Oscar had been at Steerhouse for around 6 months, staff noticed that Oscar often chose to nap next to residents who died within several hours of his arrival. It seemed to staff as if Oscar were trying to comfort and provide company to people as they died. Joan Taino, a physician at Steerhouse, clarified that it's not that the cat is consistently there first. But the cat always does manage to make an appearance, and it always seems to be in the last 2 hours. After Oscar accurately predicted 25 deaths, staff started calling family members of residents as soon as they discovered him sleeping next to someone, in order to notify them and give them an opportunity to say goodbye before the impending death. As of January 2010, Oscar had accurately predicted approximately 50 patients' deaths. I don't know about you, but this absolutely freaks me out. Just imagine you're chilling on the sofa, drinking a soda and maybe eating some chips. And then your cat walks halfway across the room, just to lie down next to you. I'd go ballistic. Maybe I should have gone to the gym. Surgeons used to operate on infants without anesthesia, including open heart surgery. They have stopped this, however. In the 1980s. In the fucking 80s. This one is the most disturbing by miles. I know, right? It keeps me up at night sometimes. Imagine all those sedated babies in excruciating pain for hours. I had ear surgery to put tubes into my ears as a young child. My parental guardian opted to not use anesthesia. She was worried I would become addicted to drugs later in life. The single most painful moment of my life. It felt like sub-zero ice picks were digging into my ear. It was so painful I had an out-of-body experience. Still did drugs later on too, so that didn't really work out at all. Genghis Khan's conquest of Persia was so devastating that the country didn't recover its population full until hundreds of years later. Ireland's population hasn't fully recovered from the potato famine yet. Not even close, still a few million from the high around 1839. Nearly sure it's one of the few countries in the world whose population is lower than it was in the 1800s. It's way lower. It was 8 million when the famine started, and the population dropped so much it is just over 5 million today. Look up a rat king. Basically, a rat king is a phenomenon created when a large group of rats become fused together by their tails via ice, dirt, hair, blood, or even faces. Encounters with this horrible phenomenon inspired some of humanity's greatest myths. I'm not sure I possess the strength to Google this. The visipulture is the scariest fact that used to happen in the history because of lack of knowledge of medical practitioners and lack of resources. The visipulture is more commonly known as buried alive or premature burial. In the olden days, premature burial was common as the medical practices lacked proper knowledge. One such incident which happened in Woodstock, Canada in 1800s is the case of Collins, a girl who was buried alive. The incident happened in Woodstock, Canada in 1800s where the girl, Collins, who was declared to be dead was buried. Her body was to be exhumed after 2 days, so that she could be buried in some place else. After her body was dug up, people were shocked to see what they saw. Her knees were up to the chin, in the image, her arm twisted behind her head, there were scratch marks on the inside of her coffin, and her shroud torn into pieces. This clearly shows that she was alive, in some sort of coma, at the time of burial, which was not recognizable by the medical professionals of that time. We can only assume as to how much terrorized she must have been feeling at the time when she woke up from her so-called coma. This is just one case. There have been so many cases of people being buried alive in the past that they made specialty safety coffins. There is a blind spot in the middle of your visual field, but you don't notice it because your brain reconstructs the picture you should see. It's called a scotoma. Back in the olden days, there were some recurring themes between the government and the general idea of not giving a fuck about its citizens. This was way back when the FDA was a new thing. Before that, people could drop meat on the ground, spit on it, it'd be half rotting, whatever, and they'd still package it because meat is meat. There was also a lack of general safety for factory workers, much less for women. The radium girls were women who would work in clock factories, painting the dials in glowing paint that had been mixed with radium. Back then, they didn't know the full extent of how painful and harmful that sort of stuff was. These girls worked hours every day handling the stuff without protection. The worst part, they would point the brushes with their lips. Yeah, they got the stuff in their mouths. Actually, maybe the worst part was that scientists on board with the factory knew how bad this stuff was. It just wasn't public knowledge. At first, it was seen as a sort of beauty thing, since the women were glowing. They were actively ingesting radium and putting it on their bodies. They paint their teeth with radium paint to smile at men and glow in the dark after their shifts ended. Enter Molly Maggie, a woman who consistently went to the dentist with complaints of tooth problems. She had to quit work because of it. The dentist would continuously pluck her teeth until a fatal day where he came to check her out for the last time. Her gums had swollen, full of blood and pus and hardly any teeth left. When he went to touch her jaw, it fell off in his hand. Not by a procedure. It just fell off. Manatees have vaginas that are the most anatomically similar to humans. Manatees may also be the inspiration for myths about mermaids, beautiful half-fish women that lured sailors to their deaths. Connecting those dots has been mentally scarring. Apparently Japan bombed China with fleas infected with bubonic plague during World War II. Big rain, I think. Oh, the Japanese did a hell of a lot fucking worse in WW2. The fact that some plants, a strangler fig in this case, will use other trees as a ladder up to the sunshine, growing as a thin plant until it reaches it. Once there, it will grow quickly, enveloping the old tree, and strangling it to death and use its dying body as a supporting pillar, while it continuously grows around it, becoming thicker and stronger until only a hollow strangler fig remains. Really awesome, but oh so terrifying. That sounds beautiful and horrific. Squirrels can be known to eat small birds and rodents. Just learned this recently, and it's totally changed my perception of them. Something about seeing one eat a bird like it is a nut is just unsettling. I've seen a squirrel drag a bird onto a tree and begin eating it. It maintained eye contact with me as it ate the bird. Also saw a squirrel chewing on a condom. I hate squirrels. Encephalitis lethargica causes you to slowly survive but not live. After bouts of deep sleep, where patients can be woken very easily but fall immediately back into the deep sleep, they're left with post-encephalitis symptoms. The main one being that their minds are fully aware and conscious, but they can't physically function, a bit like lock-in syndrome, and they display extreme apathy. They even know they're displaying apathy but can't express any emotions. So, they're completely stuck until someone throws a ball at them, which they then can immediately catch. Or until someone holds their hand and walks alongside them, then they can suddenly walk. Otherwise, nothing. So bizarre. In 1977, the average life expectancy in Cambodia was 18.91 years. That's because the Khmer Rouge killed anyone who wore glasses, because that meant they knew how to read, and therefore were a bad intellectual. Glasses and/or watch actually meant that you weren't a simple peasant farmer to the Khmer Rouge.